Hello YouTube. There was no way for a sleigh nor for one on foot, but I ordered everyone to go the old way past their settlement to the Cherepovtsi forest. So it said in the old written instructions of Prince Mikhail Andreevich of Belozersk. Centuries ago, they knew about the macabre and sinister swamps and their inhabitants. Truly a gothic location that has been dormant from the 20th century, but judging by recent events, maybe it has awakened. Vologda region is a historical region in the southern Zavolozhia. It was located in a wooded area between the Pomorya, or sea-adjacent land, in the north and the upper Volga region, Zalessia, in the south. Vologda region has been a part of the Russian North region since ancient times, and the Vologda Oblast is a federal subject of Russia. Its administrative center is the city of Vologda. The oblast has a population of 1,200,000 people, give or take. The largest city is Cherepovets. This land has ancient history and unsolved ancient mysteries. The mystery of the Cherepovets marshes, or why people have been disappearing in the Vologda region for centuries, is something I want to address today. I will use the word swamp interchangeably with the English language words such as peat bog, marshland, everglade, marsh, and quagmire. In the Vologda region, there is one of the most mysterious Russian natural zones, the Cherepovets marshes. These unremarkable-looking reservoirs have been haunting the residents of the surrounding area for centuries, producing a number of legends and myths. Even in today's age of high technology, people believe that an evil spirit lives in the swamps, who likes to harass people. In those places, drowned suicides were regularly found, for which no mental abnormalities were listed. The researchers were at loss for guesses. Is it mysticism or an inexplicable natural anomaly, or maybe one that could be explained? Lakes and swamps occupy more than 24,000 squares of the Vologda region. Mysterious legends have been forming around this area for centuries. But the most mysterious to this day are the disastrous Cherepovets marshes, poorly studied due to inaccessibility. The estimated depth of reservoirs is 5 meters, but there is every reason to believe that this figure reaches 20 meters in sinkholes. The most notorious is assigned to the Ivashevskaya swampy lake, located a few kilometers from the city of Cherepovets. According to local legend, tourists, fishermen, and gatherers of wild berries disappeared every year in those swamps. Moreover, no horror stories stopped either visitors or locals from visiting that area. It was as if the swamp somehow magically attracted people. The road went through a swamp, and apparently there were all sorts of evil spirits in the settlement. As I mentioned in the beginning of this video, attributing it to the ancient aristocrat who ruled the area. Otherwise, where did so many stories about the terrible Cherepovets swamp come from? From a scientific point of view, a swamp is a complex ecosystem with its own special flora and fauna. The proximity of groundwater, a certain humidity of the climate, relief and soil are necessary for the formation of a swamp. It just seems that the water in the swamp is stagnant. In fact, it is updated there every 5 years. Even lake water takes more than 3 times as long to do this. In dry times, large swamps can also stop forest fires. In the depths of the swamps, almost half of the volume of water of Lake Baikal is retained. Swamps regulate the flow and feed small and large rivers with water. For example, the Dnieper and Volga originate from swamps. The Khanty and Mansi people of the north believe that the whole world was born from liquid earth, that is, from a swamp. It turns out that it's not such a lost place. Experts have calculated that every year 1 hectare of swamps absorbs on average more than a ton of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and releases about half a ton of oxygen. This is in order of magnitude more than 1 hectare of forest or meadow can process. In addition, swamps attract and absorb dust particles, which in calm weather move towards a lower temperature, and the temperature above the surface of the swamps is always lower than around them. 1 hectare of swamps can swallow up to 3 tons of dust per year. Russia can be considered the birthplace of swamps. Nowhere else in the world do they exist in such quantity and volume. And people who lived in estates and villages surrounded by swamps also have certain character traits. In the notes of rural healers of the 19th century, there are very often references to the typical Russian melancholy, which may be clinical signs of the bad influence of swamps. In the 16th century, a merchant disappeared in the Vologda Lake, or swamp. They couldn't find him for 12 years. When everyone had already abandoned the search, the disappeared one, or the vanished one, showed up himself. He said that on the way, for unknown reasons, he turned off, heading not to the fair to sell his goods, but to the swamp. As soon as the man approached the edge of the reservoir, he was enveloped in unreasonable horror. The fear was so strong that the merchant wanted to hide in the swamp, diving in with his head. Wanting to get out of the incomprehensible state, the merchant ran to the forest, where he wandered for many years. According to the revelation of the lost man, he could not even imagine that he had been in the thicket for so long. Having preserved a small fraction of consciousness, the merchant ran away from this place, not even remembering about the goods, not thinking to return for them. The locals did not believe the merchant, but he volunteered to show the place to those who wished to see it. The merchant's words were fully confirmed. On the shore of the swamp, there were abandoned carts with merchant goods that had already collapsed many years ago. Most researchers of anomalous phenomena that occurred in the Cherepovets swamp define these places as possessed by a dark spirit. No one knows what the nature of this spirit is. The spirit is the protagonist of local legends, a kind of elemental dark force that brings evil and suffering without any motives. The ancient Celts or Celts called swamps the gates of spirits, where the seemingly solid ground instantly disappears from under their feet. The gates to the world of mysterious spirits of nature and deities open. Therefore the Celts or the Celts revered the swamps and came there with sacrificial gifts. In Slavic mythology, a kikimora lives in a swamp, an evil swamp spirit. It rarely shows itself to people, prefers to be invisible, and only shouts out of the swamp in a loud voice. It likes to dress up in furs made of mosses, weaves forest and swamp plants into its hair. The swamp kikimora drags gawking travelers into a quagmire where it can torture them to death. Therefore, they didn't go far to the swamp alone. It was believed that only sorcerers and witches could walk fearlessly through the swamps. As for the kikimora, please see the URL for my video on the secret police of Russian Emperor Peter the Great. You will learn a few interesting things about the Russian history too. A lot has been said about the destruction of these places, and these reasons are quite weighty. However, no anomalous phenomena had been recorded on the territory of the Cherepovets marshes at the present time. They stopped at the beginning of the last century, but something did happen in the year 2020. We'll get to that story. The recorded history of the Cherepovets marshes begins in the middle of the 19th century. The diaries of a Vologda school teacher from 1850 describe terrible events about what he saw and heard during that period. The man claimed that he could not explain what was happening with anything other than the real existence of the swamp spirit. According to eyewitnesses, an ominous howl from the depths of the quagmire hypnotized nearby people, luring them to certain death. This magical howl deprived the mind, broke the psyche, and pushed for inadequate actions. In terrible fear, the man went crazy. This is from the published account of the half-witted teacher, 1850. It's howling the spirit. Once you get there, it will stay with you forever. It sucks up the brain. It thinks and keeps silent. The teacher's father lost his mind before the narrator was born, but he confessed it only before his death. He confessed that for 20 years he had lived in kinship with the swamp, which took away his strength, his thoughts, forced him to do something improbable. The father drove the narrator out of town. Well, he got education and came back. From now on, it is impossible to leave. These swamps will be found everywhere. How can you fight with such a colossus of stinking peat? And how beautiful this swamp is when you find it for the first time. And there are almost no berries. There are very few birds. It's not a swamp at all. And how you can hear it in the city. The narrator already knew 3 people who could hear it. The swamp is thousands of years old, and there will always be people living in this city who will serve it. It is impossible to refuse. It is too late to refuse. The first official studies of the so-called lost places were organized in 1879 by the physician Gryaznov. He was pushed to such a risky step or endeavor by the story of a local merchant who, according to him, had been tormented for years by an obsessive desire to go to the swamps at someone's inexplicable behest. And one day he got stuck in a quagmire, miraculously surviving, while Gryaznov gathered volunteer assistants and went to the swamps. There they found a mountain of half-sunken carts with all sorts of goods, and as soon as they imagined how many dead were in the abyss, they rushed back as fast as they could. Gryaznov only managed to take samples of the peat with him. The results of laboratory tests that came from St. Petersburg surprised the researcher. From the conclusion it followed that the swamp mud of the Cherepovets reservoirs, that there are microorganisms unknown to science in it, complex and highly organized. Laboratory technicians of that time did not encounter such animals, so they could not come to any scientific conclusions. And near Cherepovets, cases of disappearances and suicide of local residents continued. This is from the experience of comparative study of hygienic conditions of peasant life and medical topography of Cherepovets County. Doctoral dissertation of the physician Pavel Gryaznov, St. Petersburg, the year of 1880. The spirit appeared in the swamps a long time ago, wrote down Gryaznov. No one knows who gave rise to it. Impossible nature, dark forces, or the sins of local residents. The deserted swamp lies between Sheksna and Yagorboy, on both sides of the Kanoma River, begins near the town of Cherepovets and stretches to the north for 30 versts. Russian geographical measurement site. Its area is 80 square miles. There are several lakes located among the swamp, of which the main ones are Ivashevskoye and Pustynaya. The surface of the swamp itself consists of an elastic layer having a wave-like appearance, in places broken through from the pressure of a more liquid layer, which is why the so-called floats or windows are formed. The depth of the swamp reaches only 2.5 fathoms, a little more than 5 meters. Its bottom is dense clay. The singing marshes to the north of the city are not only a legend, but also the result of a long-term observations of many people. The origin of the very deep places in relatively shallow swamps with a hard clay bottom is surprising. I have found areas without a bottom. The beast appeared a long time ago. It is unclear whether the swamps gave birth to the languid spirit or the spirit itself gave birth to the swamps for itself. No one can know this anymore. In the forgotten century, merchant people began to disappear along the southern road from Beloozero. One by one, two by two, or even whole carts, they left the northern city and did not return back. They sinned against evil-doing people, against the swamp of foreign beast. Only they sinned in vain. Once they searched the neighborhood with weapons and found an abandoned cart on the shore of a large swamp. There were no horses or rider nearby, and that cart was left with the loot, just abandoned. The traces of the living have gone into the swamp. That's the end of the matter. But the prophet forced the northern merchants to sometimes go on a wild ride, and many terrible tales about a big dragon were heard in Beloozero. And 2 centuries later, one person managed to return. For 10 years he did not make himself felt, but when he came to, he told so many tales that for a long time he would have been known as an oddball of cranks. But he led the unbelievers to the edge of a huge swamp where the remains of carts lay along the shore. Terror seized his fellow travelers, and in a panic they fled from there. The swamp, according to my calculations, is 40 kilometers north of Cherepovets. I tried to take peat samples from this strange place. I had a headache for 2 days. I didn't want to live. I sent samples of peat to St. Petersburg, so I alarmed my people in the capital. In addition to plant residues, there were traces of more highly developed life in the samples. They wrote that my swamp is rare. There are no more such swamps. And my neighbors, my local hosts, they were teaching me not to go to that forgotten road, not to seek my own destruction. Strange people, dark people. I've been living in this backwater for 2 years. My dissertation has progressed only by a third, and they are ill in a strange way. You can draw such a diagram. Such a number of half-wits probably cannot be found anywhere else. Suicide is just an urban nightmare. Last year, 4 hanged themselves, and 3 completely left, vanished. The best guys are gone, and so from time immemorial here, everything will die clean or disappear. One local teacher did some experiments 20 or 30 years ago, so the police buried his notes, and the police official has already warned me twice not to go into those swamps. It's heresy. Now, let's look at other accounts from the area. Even the ancient Celts called the swampy area the gates of spirits. The ancestors were sure that in the place where the solid ground leaves from under their feet, the doors to another world open. So, having said that, let me tell you about a diary of a local man from the year of 1905. from someone who lived in the area and had very strange experiences. It was a person by the last name of Porfiliev, and he testified about the unexplained phenomena near Cherepovets. So in 1905 he wrote that if people do not leave their native swampy places, sooner or later they die there. But even after leaving, they feel an incredible desire to return, hearing even from afar the sighs of the lake. Porfiliev considered a mental illness that threatens every local. 2 years after that recording, after the man was overtaken by a mental disorder himself. They didn't believe Porfiliev in Moscow. He has been asking the district about this phenomenon for 20 years, but no one has been able to confirm the account of St. Petersburg doctor. All the best people really leave Cherepovets or died there, and the percentage of suicides is no longer higher than the national one, but there are many more half-wits. This is not a mental illness, some other disease. A person stops waiting for the best, becomes silent, and if he does not drink vodka, begins to tell incredible stories. It's like he hears a lake sighing somewhere in the north in the morning, and that water lives someone else's life. It subjugates people who do its will. The lake cannot live alone. There are 2 or 3 people in the city who obey it. They are connected with it but by some ties. If they are crazy, it's useless to ask them. And what do those who have just been drinking with water look like? How to recognize them? And now, from the 1907 entries in the diary of another local man, the narrator writes that he is sick. His mother told him about his uncle's illness. He was also ill. The narrator's head is buzzing in the morning. The horror is that the noise is not in the head itself, but outside it. The noise comes from the north. The narrator had seen this swamp. It's not much different from others, but he immediately recognized it. Since then, he has never left the city. Even the thought of moving causes animal fear. The narrator is not afraid to die. It's not death. Only it's not the death, it's the loss of himself. At first everything was fine, and then fatigue piled up. The narrator did not want to write, read, or think, and now it seemed to the narrator it prevents him from writing these lines. It's alive, because the narrator is already dead. And here are comments from a local ufologist from the year of 1990. Based on the accounts presented, the bad air of the Cherepovets marshes has such a huge impact on people that they spiritualize this swamp itself. All 3 researchers found that the smartest ones were in a hurry to leave their hometown, or strange things happened to their brains. They heard long-drawn sounds from the north in the morning. In many ways, they are right. Only one famous person came out of Cherepovets, the artist Vereshchagin, who, as we know, left his hometown as a very young man and was in no hurry to return to it. A local aristocrat and noted Russian poet Batyushkov visited his Cherepovets estate, already being mentally ill. An extraordinary boy, the future poet Igor Severyanin, lived in Cherepovets for 5 years, and his sensitive soul felt something was wrong there. Later he cursed that gloomy town. Not so long ago, a representative of one of the Russian UFO research societies published a description found in the Vologda archives of a case that occurred in the Cherepovets marshes in the year of 1911. The epileptic son of a local shoemaker went to the pier near the reservoir. Approaching the quagmire, the boy threw himself to the ground and began to beat his head against the stones or rocks, breaking the bones of his skull. Before he died, He declared that he was going to the dirty abyss because he heard knocking from below. Few people understood what his words meant then, and forensic experts concluded suicide on the basis of mental disorder. Eyewitnesses of the Cherepovets phenomena and surviving victims all insisted that the swamp lives its own life, and the water in it is like a living being, unbridled force subjugating others. People who fall under this influence become aggressive, dependent and depressed, and can never break the invisible connection with the abnormal reservoir. Many frightened residents hurry to leave their homes. For the same reason, the famous artist Vasily Vereshchagin left Cherepovets. By the way, I have a video about him and his strange paintings, mostly war-related paintings. Very interesting. He later said that the spirit of insanity dwells on the shores of the swamp. Over time, more and more scientists became interested in the natural phenomenon. Chemists assumed that the rotting of biological material on the swamp bottom causes people to hallucinate. Actually, Japanese researchers who studied the Cherepovets marshes came to the conclusion that the molecular structure changes in the sludge. Local residents drank water from nearby wells where swamp material could easily get through the undercurrents. Something like poisoning was happening, and those experiencing addiction subconsciously reached out to the swamp in order to taste the hallucinogenic liquid again. Well, Cherepovets marshes are an area that has not been studied enough yet. They're called an anomaly with good reason because of the disappearance of people. There's another fame, so to say, of this bad place. It is that these swamps claim to be the champion in the number of suicides. It is also impossible to explain the condition of local residents from a scientific point of view. Almost every one of them can boast of a certificate where depressive maniac syndrome is indicated as a diagnosis. Even the most mentally and physically healthy people near swamps are capable of losing their minds. Statistics confirm that in terms of suicide rates, the Cherepovets marshes have overtaken other regions of the country by 5 times. And there are much more criminal offenses committed in that area than in other areas. Scientists have made enough attempts to conduct a study. A few decades ago, a soil analysis was done. To everyone's amazement, unknown life forms were found in it, but so far there is no documentary evidence of this information. Scientists themselves are in no hurry to give any explanations. I mean, look, this is according to some sources. I wish I had more detailed information, but for some reason it's not easy to come by. But according to one hypothesis, vegetation is special at the bottom of the reservoirs. When rotting, it secretes hallucinatory substances. When inhaling a small dose of it, panic begins, but an excessive amount threatens not just panic, but also an irresistible desire to commit suicide. The proposed hypothesis seemed quite logical, and no further research was undertaken. While according to another hypothesis, the location in the anomalous zone had a negative effect on the water. As a result, it became disastrous for local residents who drank it. For all the grotesque nature of this assumption, it is considered real by some scientists. If the Cherepovets marshes have been accumulating negative emanations for centuries, generously sharing them with people and driving the people to the point of losing their minds, then this fully explains what is happening. And it's much easier to believe, for some, that the legend of the evil ghost or spirit. Cherepovets marshes are still a little studied area in the Vologda region. Again, nowadays it is customary to talk about it as an anomalous zone because mysterious disappearance of people from roads, frequent suicides, and inexplicably large number of crazy people in nearby villages and strange behavior of seemingly quite healthy local people have long been observed there. For a long time it was believed that plants have no feelings and the plant soul is primitive. Modern biologists are gradually coming to the conclusion that plants are not so different from humans and animals. They can see, feel touch, smell, they have hearing and even taste. Instead of eyes, plants have proteins that respond subtly to any energy radiation. Taste enzymes have been found on the roots which help to find delicacies underground. For example, mushroom spores. With the help of smells, plants communicate with each other. And this has to do with Cherapovets swamps as well, so you understand why I'm talking about this. Plants can experience emotional stress and establish contact with humans. It is likely that plants possess all these properties due to the water in them, which is able to remember information and change its structure under the influence of sound and electromagnetic waves. Experiments were carried out with individual plants, but it never came to the study of a large plant organism immersed in water that is having access to a kind of water information library, for example, such as a swamp. And completely in vain. After all, if every plant is so animated, how alive and sensitive a sustainable ecological system can be? It is not worthy that only in the swamps there is a species of predator plants. This is understandable because everything is reasonable in nature. There are few substances needed by plants in the water of swamps. They are washed away and carried away by water. However, for example, the dewdrop gets them from the organisms of insects that it feeds on. We do not know any other details and material evidence that shed at least some light on the story of the Cherapovet swamp. It is assumed that the swamp, in the form in which it terrified the whole district, died somewhere at the turn of the 1920s, 1930s. Rather, it did not die, it simply ceased to manifest itself, at least openly. Otherwise, how would it have allowed such a rapid construction of the city and the development of industry? And the swamp could not resist the active tide of people in Cherapovets. Has it given up, or is it just hiding? And what about the connection to the plant life in the swamps itself? Somebody needs to study this. In any case, now in the city and the surrounding villages, people lead or have led a common measured life. There is no more craziness, and crimes of course exist, and we mentioned them, but it's an industrial city. Only occasionally visiting adventurers who have decided to explore the swamp wilds on their own without the help of locals encounter something allegedly inexplicable. In fact, everything mysterious is connected with the emissions of swamp gas, or with the usual manifestations of life in the swamp. Where else, my listeners, have you heard about the swamp gases? Think of another major country. During the study of the Cherapovet swamps in 1992, a curious phenomenon of voice loss was indeed discovered. As described by eyewitnesses, the sound floated. It was difficult to talk. At a distance of 30 paces, you could shout at the top of your voice and you could barely hear, but a couple of steps to the side and the audibility became excellent. However, such acoustic phenomena sometimes occur in other not so scary swamps. In all likelihood, due to the special undulating terrain, there are effects similar to the propagation of sound in anechoic chambers, where porous and fibrous materials are used as absorbers in a swamp, this role can be performed by sphagnum moss and other loose marsh vegetation and its remnants. I want to add something about the Soviet period. You see, in the Soviet times, in the Vologda region, and not only there, the title collector was not very safe. The KGB was very interested in lovers of antiquity, or those, who loved antiquity and collected it, and those who were in correspondence with colleagues from all over the world. It was especially dangerous to collect weapons and coins for which you could serve time in prison. Not very nice prisons too. This means that those also who were interested in related collection of the paranormal lore were also in danger, as their interests went against the official Marxist-Leninist dogma imposed on us by the socialist motherland. These were dangerous times. You couldn't really delve into such matters and not pay the price if the stool pigeons or informers went to the KGB. Anyway, after the 1920s, the sinister swamp allegedly lost its power and ceased to terrify the neighborhood. But you need to know that Cherepovets is one of the most polluted Russian cities. I have presented information in my other videos about the nature striking back at those who pollute the land, the environment. What if it is not just nature, but entities and forces we really do not know much about? Could this story mean that it is back in the swamps? Well, on October 10, 2020, according to Russian news report, here is what happened. The body of a missing man was found in the marshes near Cherepovets. A 63-year-old man who disappeared in the Cherepovets district was found dead in the marshes near Cherepovets. A resident of the village of Abakanova went to another village through the forest and disappeared. We have been looking for him for more than 10 days. Yesterday, a volunteer with a dog went to the place, found the body, handed it over to the police. Perhaps the man got lost and became ill. The places there are quite impassable. There's a lot of water. The body had to be taken out of the forest. Alexandra Vasilyeva, a volunteer of the Azimut search party, told the official website of the city of Cherepovets. The deceased was found by volunteer Semyon Gurichev. During the search, he himself fell into the swamp twice, up to his waist. I'm sure there are documents in the Vologda city archives that have even more stories. And I will bring you more tales of paranormal Russia, Eurasia, nearby countries. And if you like my research, I ask that you please support me through the links you will find in the description to this video. Thank you for your attention to my work. Please subscribe to my channel and please tell others.